There's two principal attacks that you got to worry about. There's the attack on proof of work, the attack on mining. Proof of work is what keeps Bitcoin uncorruptible, right? Which is why governments are big advocates for something like proof of stake. They would like you to believe it's because of the environment. They would like you to believe it's because of the planet. I'll get to why that isn't in a little bit. Alright everybody, if you are new to this channel, this will be new to you, but if you've been subscribed to this channel, this will not come as a surprise to you. Connect this what we were talking about during the inflation. Governments get a lot of their power from the ability to create money out of thin air, right? They're able to fund wars, they're able to fund social programs that they normally wouldn't be able to afford without raising taxes. If they raise too much taxes, they start a revolution because people don't want to pay for this. So inflation is this very sneaky way. Now, the problem for them is Bitcoin. Bitcoin is a hindrance to them because if enough people opt out of their system, they could print as much money as they want, but if nobody uses it, they can't really get away with it. So Bitcoin is a problem to governments, especially governments that have strong monetary systems, which is why you have countries like Panama, which is countries that you have the Central African Republic, like the country of El Salvador, that don't create their money, therefore they don't control their monetary policy, which is why they've been some of the first countries to adopt something like Bitcoin, right? If you don't control your own money, if you don't print your own money, you're not incentivized to not try something new, potentially something that is better, right? But in countries like the United States or places like the European Union that do benefit from the power of the money printer, Bitcoin is a problem to them. We've been covering the attacks on Bitcoin for very long. There's two principal attacks that you got to worry about. There's the attack on proof of work, the attack on mining. Proof of work is what keeps Bitcoin uncorruptible, right? Which is why governments are big advocates for something like proof of stake. They would like you to believe it's because of the environment. They would like you to believe it's because of the planet. I'll get to why that isn't in a little bit. But in reality, what we believe on Simply Bitcoin, it's because they can't control it. In a proof of stake system, if governments capture the stakers, right, they could implement an inflationary system or a system of which they can control, right? So attack number one is the attack on proof of work. Attack number two, which is an attack that in my opinion is a little bit more insidious and it is an attack that I think is going to be a little bit more successful. It's the attack on self-custody. Most people that buy Bitcoin, they don't take self-custody of it. They buy it on Robinhood. They're like, dude, I own $200 worth of Bitcoin and that's that. But the problem is that if you don't take self-custody, are you really buying Bitcoin? No, you're buying paper Bitcoin. Robinhood could tell you that you own $200 of Bitcoin, but there's no way for you to actually verify it unless you take self-custody, which is why we advocate for self-custody so strongly on the show. Self-custody is a little bit more daunting, right? Because you've been accustomed to the bank taking responsibility over the custody of your wealth. With Bitcoin, it's a radically different system. In my opinion, it's going backwards in a time where people used to hoard their wealth. In my opinion, that's a good thing. I think outsourcing the responsibility of the custody of your wealth leads to many bad things. It leads to dangerous situations, right? If, for example, the bank runs in the 1930s, right, during the Great Depression, if people custodied their wealth, then there wouldn't be a bank run because everyone would be holding their money. Now with fiat, that's very difficult because think about it. Fine, if you're holding $200 worth of fiat, it's not that big of a problem. But if you're holding $100,000 worth of fiat, that's a big bag of just cash, right? There's security issues to that as well, right? So the point is, right, is that the self-custody aspect is a lot easier for governments to manipulate and a lot easier for governments to ban, because if you don't know enough about Bitcoin, from your perspective, governments aren't really banning Bitcoin because they don't have to. What they could do is they can make it very difficult for you to take self-custody of your Bitcoin. And the reasons that they're going to use, right, like the episode that we did in December, like that South Korean exchange, right, is that they're going to tell you that if you self-custody and that gives you the ability to send to unknown wallets that don't have KYC. That's the point. That's the point, right? Their system is a system of exclusion, right? If you're in Korea, if you're in Cuba, or if you're in Africa, right, you're cut off from the traditional financial system. You can't use it, especially like for example, if you were in a country that the US deems unbankable, like Russia, you're a Russian citizen. You're not responsible for what the Russian government did invading Ukraine, but you're still cut off from the financial system. What coin, what system could you still use use Bitcoin, right? So they know that, right? And that is a reason that they're going to attack it. Again, you don't have to take my word for it. That's exactly what happened. Check this out from the Treasury, the U.S. Department of Treasury website themselves. This is Wally Adeyemo. He is the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, and these are his remarks at Consensus. Anyways, let's check out what he has to say. We are working to address the unique risks associated with unhosted wallets. Because unhosted wallets are effectively just addresses on a blockchain, it can be difficult to determine who really owns and controls them. That's a feature, not a bug. Creating opportunities to abuse this heightened anonymity. Fundamentally, financial institutions need to know who are they transacting and doing business with to make sure they are not making payments to criminals, sanctioned enemies, or others. When it comes to unhosted wallets, we are working to provide them the information they need to avoid facilitating these kinds of illicit payments. Okay, so let's actually look at the data, okay? Because they say, right, they talk a lot about these illicit activities, right? And I also want you guys to pay attention to the framing that they used, right? They used the word unhosted wallet. And it's really interesting how they use that wording, because to you, if you're reading that, it makes you think that that isn't the norm. The norm is a hosted wallet, right? Think about the wording that they're using. If you're a Bitcoiner, you know that there's no difference between a hosted Bitcoin address and an unhosted Bitcoin address. That is wording. That's a narrative that they're trying to use, right? Anyways, so let's look at the data, right? Because again, he's making it seem like this is a major problem. Criminals are going to use this. But if you look at the data, it tells a different story, right? Only 0.5% of the total crypto transactions volume is for illicit activities. The growth of legitimate cryptocurrency usage far outpaces the growth for criminal use. Last year, the illicit activity share of cryptocurrency transaction volume hit its lowest percentage ever. A recent report by Chainalysis has revealed that the legitimate usage of cryptocurrencies far outweighs their illegal use. The report pointed out that only 0.15% of the total cryptocurrency transaction volume last year was for illicit activities. Chainalysis said that the total transaction volume grew to 15.8 trillion in 2021, up 567% from 2020's total. The 0.15% recorded last year was the lowest ever. In 2019, the figure stood at 3.3%, while in 2020, it was 0.62. The reduction in the percentage of illicit transactions comes despite the cryptocurrency market experiencing massive adoption last year. Chainalysis said the figure could rise as it continues to identify more addresses associated with illicit activity. For instance, 2020's initial figure was 0.34%, but it was later revised upwards 0.62% after discovering more illicit transactions during its research. So again, and if you compare that to fiat money, the fiat money number is around 3%. So it looks like crypto, Bitcoin, the thing that they're attacking so hard, right? The right to self-custody, the right to custody your wealth is not really being used for the things they say there's being used. And then, of course, you have Elizabeth Warren pouncing on the Russia narrative. She took advantage of that. We covered this on this episode, right? Where she took advantage of, you know, the conflict in Ukraine and how the narrative was being sold to the public that Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies could be used by people to circumvent Russian sanctions. But there's no evidence to point that. So if there's no evidence of increasing criminal activity, it's actually lower, and the criminal activity is actually higher in fiat, you have to ask yourself, why are they still pressuring so hard? Why are they so hell-bent on attacking it? Well, the answer is simple, right? Because they cannot control it. If they can't control it, they can't debase the currency, which they do with fiat. So again, this all has to do with power and control. Bitcoin is something that they can't control. Therefore, they must use any narrative possible, whether that it is bad for the climate, it's used for criminal activity, to try to attack it. Now, here's the thing. In the latest Lummis bill, to give her credit, in the crypto bill, which we covered all last week, Opti and I did, she introduced legislation that would actually protect the right to self-custody. So why would she be introducing legislation that would protect someone's right to self-custody? Because clearly she's worried that if the government gets into a pickle, they might do exactly what they did back in the 1930s, where FDR made it illegal for US citizens to own gold, right? So what makes you think that it wouldn't be different with Bitcoin? If this legislation passes, it would actually protect the ability for US citizens to take self-custody, which is even crazier, right? If you think about how crazy the 6102 order was, it's illegal for you to own a naturally occurring metal. It's illegal for you to own number or a private key, because that's really what it is. Numbers and letters. That's the type of argument they're saying. saying. Will numbers hurt you? No, it has nothing to do with that. It has to do with the fact that Bitcoin is a threat to the current nation state model, because a lot of the power that they get comes from their ability to manipulate monetary policy and their ability to control people through money, of which they print and they control. Bitcoin's a threat to that. It's a parallel system. It's a peer-to-peer system. Take self-custody, guys. You don't want to be on the other side of this, where, let's say, God forbid, the US government makes it illegal for US citizens to own gold. For US citizens to own Bitcoin, and you don't have your keys. That's very, very, very bad news for you.